The soil of the Dutton Ranch has soaked up a lot of secrets over the years, but it has never tasted a betrayal as bitter as this.
Carter is dead, and the man who took his life isn't an enemy riding in from the outside.
It was Tom.
The bunkhouse was supposed to be a brotherhood bound by fire and iron. But now that sacred brand is nothing more than a cover for a murderer. When the sun came up over the mountains this morning,
nobody expected the quiet young kid who spent his days learning the ropes to be lying cold on the barn floor.
Carter had his whole life ahead of him, learning how to be a real cowboy under the tough love of the ranch.
But jealousy and hidden hatred can make a man do the unthinkable.
Tom let his anger build up until it snapped, pulling the trigger and ending a young life in a single heartbeat. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm that ever hit this valley.
Now, the dirt in that barn holds a story that will burn this entire dynasty to the ground if it ever gets out to the public or the law. The blood on the floorboards is still fresh, but the cover-up had to start immediately. In a place like this, you do not call the cops when a body turns up, especially when the killer wears the same clothes and eats at the same table as everyone else.
Tom thought he was smart enough to hide the truth, but every lie leaves a trail. He spent the early hours wiping down tools, washing his hands in the cold river water, and trying to act like it was just another normal workday.
But you cannot wash away the look in a killer's eyes. Every time he looks at the other hands, his heart pounds against his ribs, because he knows what happens to people who bring trouble to this valley. The worst part of it all is the sheer waste of a young life.
Carter was finally finding his place, learning what it meant to stand tall and earn respect. He trusted the men around him, thinking they were his family. He never saw the threat coming from inside his own home. Tom saw the boy as a threat or a burden, someone getting in the way of his own standing on the land. That single moment of madness destroyed two lives at once. Carter is gone forever, and Tom is now a dead man walking, waiting for the truth to catch up with him. The shadow of this murder is already stretching across every acre of the property.
The wind carrying through the trees sounds different today, cold and bitter. You can feel the tension in the air like electricity before a massive thunderstorm.
The brand on a man's chest used to mean absolute loyalty until death, but Tom proved that even the strongest bonds can be broken by cowardice. This isn't just about a lost life anymore. It is about a cancer inside the gates that will tear down everything the family fought for generations to build. Rip Cole did not need to see the body to know that something was deeply wrong with the morning air. He walked into the main barn with his usual heavy boots, but the silence inside was far too heavy, even for a quiet sunrise.
The smell of fresh pine shavings was mixed with the metallic scent of fresh blood, and that was all it took for his instincts to go into high alert.
When he found the bloody cap resting near the back door, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles turned white.
Rip knows every inch of this dirt, every shadow, and every sound, and he knew instantly that this was not an accident or an attack by an outsider.
The killer knew where the guard dogs slept, knew which gates were left unlocked,
and knew exactly where Carter would be alone in the dark. The search inside the bunkhouse started before the rest of the world even woke up. Rip stood at the end of the room like an unstoppable force of nature, watching 6 grown men pull on their boots and pretend everything was fine.
He did not yell, and he did not make a scene, because a dangerous predator never makes noise before it strikes. Instead, he stared directly into the eyes of every single cowboy in that room, looking for the tiny twitch, the sweat on the forehead, or the shaky hands that always give a liar away.
Tom could barely pull his belt loop tight without his fingers trembling, and that small detail was all Rip needed to see. The pressure in that room was enough to crack steel, as everyone realized a murderer was standing right beside them, wearing the exact same ranch coat. Every single man in that bunkhouse lives by a strict code, and breaking that code means forfeiting your right to breathe the mountain air.
Tom tried his best to blend into the morning chores, carrying hay bales and saddling horses as if his soul was completely clear. But the guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. He kept checking his reflection in the water trough, terrified that someone would see the stains he missed on his sleeves.
Every time a truck engine roared in the distance or a shadow crossed the barn doorway, his breath hitched in his throat. He thought killing the boy would solve his problems and give him the power he wanted. But all it did was build a cage around him that was shrinking by the second. The news reached the main house before the sun even cleared the snow-capped peaks,
setting off a quiet panic among the leadership. Beth Dutton did not cry when she heard the report, because her grief always transforms directly into pure, unadulterated fury.
She stood on the grand porch looking out over the valley, holding a black cup of coffee. her mind already calculating the price Tom was going to pay. Carter was the closest thing she had to her son, a young boy she tried to protect from the harsh realities of the world, and now he was gone because of a snake inside her own grass. The family has fought politicians, land developers, and billionaires to keep this territory safe. But fighting a traitor living in your own home is a completely different kind of war. The sun reached its peak over the valley, casting harsh light across a ranch that had officially turned into a battleground. News of the missing boy had spread like wildfire through the local channels, bringing dusty law enforcement cruisers kicking up gravel on the main road. Sheriffs and deputies stepped out onto the dirt, badges shining in the midday heat, completely unaware that they were stepping directly into a powder keg. For generations, the Dutton family handled their own problems behind closed doors, away from judge and jury, but having police officers snooping around the stables made every single cowboy sweat through his shirt. Tom watched from the shadow of the equipment shed, watching the flashing blue lights, knowing that if the law found Carter's body first, his life was over. But if Rip found him first, he wouldn't even live long enough to see the inside of a courtroom. The atmosphere among the ranch hands completely deteriorated into paranoia and cold stares. Nobody trusted the man standing next to him anymore, and simple conversations suddenly felt like interrogations. Longtime friends who had shared meals, worked double shifts in the freezing rain, and risked their lives together were now keeping their distance, hands resting uncomfortably close to their belt buckles. Every whispered conversation in the tag room stopped dead the moment Tom walked past, replaced by heavy silence and eyes full of sharp suspicion. The bunkhouse brotherhood was completely shattered, broken into pieces by a single act of cowardice. The men could feel the storm brewing over the mountains, and everyone knew that before this day was over, blood was going to spill across the dirt again. Up in the main office, John Dutton sat behind his heavy oak desk, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the vast empire he had spent a lifetime defending at all costs. He did not raise his voice when discussing the situation, but the quiet coldness in his tone was far more terrifying than any scream. He knew that an investigation from outside authorities could expose decades of buried secrets hidden in the canyon, threatening everything he built for his children. Protecting the land meant keeping the law out of their business, but bringing justice to the person who took Carter's life was an absolute necessity that could not be compromised. The choice was clear and brutal. Eliminate the traitor before the police connect the dots, or watch the entire legacy burn down under the weight of a murder investigation. Out in the open pastures, the hunt was already underway, quiet, deliberate, and relentless. Rip rode his black horse along the tree line, searching for any sign of broken branches, fresh tire tracks, or disturbed earth that could reveal where Tom tried to hide his crime. The wind howled through the high pine trees, carrying the bitter cold of late autumn, while the shadow of the mountain range seemed to stretch longer and darker across the valley floor. Tom knew he was running out of time, his chest heaving with every ragged breath as he plotted his next move. He could try to steal a truck and make a run for the state line, but deep down, he knew the ranch had very long arms, and there was nowhere on earth far enough to hide from the vengeance coming his way. The afternoon light faded into a bruised purple twilight as the final showdown reached its breaking point. Tom made his move under the cover of the long shadows, heading toward the western edge of the property where the tree line met the steep canyon drop. He carried a heavy canvas bag and a stolen rifle, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs with every step he took through the dry grass. He thought he could slip through the mountain pass and disappear into the wilderness before anyone noticed he was gone, but the ranch never lets a traitor walk away that easily. As he reached the crest of the ridge, the silhouette of a rider emerged from the gloom, blocking the only path to freedom. Rip sat on his horse, silent as a mountain, holding a heavy rope in his hands and staring down at the man who broke the ultimate law of the land. There were no long speeches, no second chances, and no mercy waiting at the edge of that cliff. Tom backed away slowly, raising his rifle with trembling arms and screaming excuses into the cold mountain air, trying to explain that it was all an accident, that the boy had pushed him too far. But his words were swallowed instantly by the rising wind, falling on ears that had long ago closed to lies. Rip dismounted without taking his eyes off the target, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of an apex predator that already knew the outcome of the chase. In a flash of chaotic motion, the rifle clattered onto the rocks, leaving Tom on his knees in the dirt, gasping for air as the cold reality of his fate slammed into him with full force back at the main house. John Dutton stood quietly on the porch, watching the darkness swallow the valley whole.
He knew that whatever happened up on that ridge tonight would never be spoken of again. Another deep secret buried under feet of cold mountain soil alongside all the others. The law enforcement vehicles had finally turned their engines around and driven away into the night, empty-handed and unaware of the silent justice that had just been carried out in the high country.
Carter was gone, and the gap he left behind would remain an open wound on the heart of the family for years to come.
But the honor of the brand had been restored through absolute,
unyielding retribution. The stars came out cold and sharp over the Dutton Valley, shining down on an empire that had survived yet another deadly storm from within.
The bunkhouse was quiet tonight, the remaining cowboys sitting in silence around the wood stove, fully aware that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed.
The memory of Carter's laughter and the shadow of Tom's ultimate betrayal would linger in those wooden stalls forever, reminding every man who wore the brand of the exact cost of disloyalty. The land remained standing, wild, beautiful, and unforgiving, ready to consume anyone who dares to threaten the family legacy as Season 2 unfolds.